We want to turn now our attention to our news partner, WTOP anchor and aviation expert Dan Ronan. Thank you so much for joining us. Your team has been so instrumental and helpful in our coverage to make sure we flex the biggest news muscle we can for a huge story like this. Your expertise is in aviation, so help me understand. We know mid-air collisions, they are rare. What can you share from your reporting on this tragedy right now?
Everything appears so normal up until the moment of impact. There's a couple things that stand out. About 20 seconds before the impact, air traffic control says to the Black Hawk pilot to be aware that the regional jet is there and tells the regional jet to go on and continue on final, but also tells the Black Hawk pilot to get behind the regional jet. Very common order in air traffic control. Get behind the plane. Don't get in front of him. Get behind him. And the Black Hawk pilot acknowledges that he has the plane in sight. But then here's the key. He says something, I need a visual. And that indicates to me that as he's saying this to the air traffic controller, yes, I've got him, but I also need a visual. There's a question of, did he really have the regional jet in sight? And as we've seen the video, it's clear there are multiple planes on approach to Reagan National last night, just before 9 o'clock. There is the possibility that the Black Hawk pilot may have gotten confused or had situational awareness and maybe not recognize the proper plane and then hit the regional jet. The other thing that came to mind, too, is that if you look at the video, you can see just before the impact on the right wing, the strobe light on the right wing is blinking. It is clear that the plane is on final approach. It's 350 feet or so above the Potomac River. It's right where it needs to be. And then there's the fireball and the explosion, which leads to me that the collision took place behind the wing, in the aft section of the airplane, in the back of the airplane. In this case, there's no way that if this accident did take place behind the wing, there's no way that the pilots of the regional jet had any idea what was coming. One other point, I talked to an aviation pro, a source who's very good, and said that the Black Hawk helicopters, because they are often in combat situations, that they have fuel tanks that are designed not to explode. You don't want a helicopter to have a crash and then have the folks on board die in a fiery crash. So there's a mechanism in the tanks to prevent the tanks from exploding. So it was his opinion only, but that the likely explosion was caused when the fuel tank on the regional jet was breached and burst.
Dan, that's very helpful in understanding just how all of the sequence of events may have unfolded. But as we show this image of the actual moment of impact, and you talked about the possibility of there being some miscommunication in terms of which aircraft the folks in the helicopter said they had within sight or were aware of. But I'm wondering, whose responsibility is it to alert all parties of the elevation of these different aircraft? Because that in itself would help identify where they should be looking.
Well, that's a great point. This is called Helicopter Route 4, widely used. We see these helicopters flying in this corridor around DCA all the time. The elevation requirements, the altitude requirements are 200 feet. If this crash took place at 300 feet, 325 feet, which the radar track shows that it does, if that's the case, then clearly the helicopter, for reasons that we don't know, and it may be a long time before we find out, the helicopter was above its assigned altitude. 200 feet means 200 feet. It doesn't mean 250. It doesn't mean 275. It means 200 feet. And this is something that I'm sure the NTSB is going to be looking at, because the charts say 200 feet on the altitude for flights helicopter flights using this corridor, a widely used corridor, in this case going to Bowling and Anacostia or from Fort Belvoir or from the Pentagon, widely used. We see planes, helicopters, excuse me, in and out of this corridor all the time.
Dan, it's one of the most regulated airspaces in the world. A question for you. You know, we know there are systems on aircraft to prevent horrible accidents like this, you know, when you're using either visual sight versus maybe a radar or another type of security system. Would something like that be on a military helicopter like this, or would it have the option to not be equipped and pilots rely only on sight?
You're talking about TCAS is what it's called. It's on commercial aviation, and ADS-B, which is another form of a transponder code. Of course, the helicopter had transponder. I'm not aware if the Black Hawk was using TCAS. I don't know the answer to that. But if you are in a combat situation, certainly you don't want someone to be able to track where you're going. That's going to be another question for NTSB and the FAA to investigate, to look at. But the jet, the RJ, using TCAS, certainly.
And Dan, last hour we heard from the president, and he talked about the likelihood that the military service members on board the Black Hawk were using night vision goggles. What does that tell you about their ability to clearly identify other aircraft in the area with the backdrop of a very busy urban city skyline of Alexandria, and the potential for you to sort of be in a position where you miscalculate and your judgment is off because you're wearing those night vision goggles? Is that a factor?
We'll find out. I've never worn night vision goggles when I've been flying at night, but I will tell you that flying at night, visually or on instruments, is extremely challenging. It requires every ounce of concentration that you have in order to fly the airplane safely. I'm fortunate enough that before 9/11, I was able to fly a general aviation airplane into DCA on that very runway that where this accident took place more than 20 years ago. And it required every ounce of concentration that I had to do this, whether you're flying visual or you're flying on instruments. You're right. You have lights, you have all of the, what's compounded around the DC area is that you have the Pentagon, you have all of the prohibited airspace, the White House, you have the Capitol, the Washington Monument, the corridor coming up the Potomac River from the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. Very restricted airspace. You are under air traffic control the entire way, but you need to bring not your A game, you need to bring your A+ game, no matter what type of aircraft you're flying.
Really is no room for error as you approach DCA, especially because the runway is so short there.
Well, the runway that you're talking about, 33, is 5,409 feet, more than adequate to handle a regional jet. However, in most cases, they use runway 1, the longer runway, 7,400 feet. This runway was okay for a regional jet. You wouldn't put a 737 or a one of the Airbuses on that, no. But for a regional jet or for a private airplane of some sort of corporate jet, yeah, it can handle it. And in this case, they went on to 3.3 because of winds. As you know, we had very gusty winds in the DC area yesterday. And the one thing you want when you are landing is you want a straight in headwind. You want the wind coming right over your nose, and that's what you really want, because it acts as a brake. It helps you slow the airplane down, but it also gives a smoother ride to your passengers. You're not battling a crosswind and trying to navigate with a 20 or 30 knot wind coming off of your right or left side. Crosswinds are tricky. They can be very, very dangerous. And so in this case, the air traffic control and the pilot made the decision to shift over, not much, just a short shift of 30 degrees or so, to get a better wind right down the nose of the airplane. From a piloting standpoint, it makes perfect sense.
By all accounts, with the preliminary information that we have at this moment, it seems as though this pilot of the American Eagle literally did not see this coming. What kind of information do you think we might be able to gather from the cockpit voice recorder?
Oh, we're going to get a lot. We're going to get a lot of information right up to the second of the impact. We're going to get all of the audio recordings. We're going to get information about the speed. We're going to get information about what the flaps were set at, anything mechanical that was taking place in the airplane, anything that is audio with regards to the conversation. One thing I should point out is that in this landing environment, whether you're flying a Cessna or a corporate jet or a commercial jet for an airliner, we have a rule called sterile cockpit, that when you are in the landing environment, in this case below 10,000 feet, the conversation has to be 100% all business. There's no chatting about ball games or where we're going to go out to dinner afterwards or how our family is doing or how the golden retriever is at the house. None of that talk. Everything is strictly business. The conversations, anything extraneous is off limits. You talk about the landing. You talk about the briefing for the landing. You get the weather off of the ATIS, the Automated Terminal Information Service. You get the weather off of the ATIS. That's what you do. And then one pilot is flying the airplane, and we don't know if this was the first officer or the captain. We don't know, and we'll find out. One pilot flies the airplane. The other pilot looks for traffic, and he scans, or she scans, and they look, and they make a concerted effort to go from left to right, and they scan across the horizon looking for traffic. That pilot will also be working the radios and talking to air traffic control. It's teamwork. It's cockpit resource management, as they call it. It works exceptionally well. And in this case, something went wrong. We don't know. We won't know for a while, but it clearly is a case of where, and I don't like to speculate, but I think we're going to be looking very closely at the actions of the Black Hawk pilot and the crew there.
Critical details that we will soon see. WTOP anchor Dan Ronan, thank you so much.